Welcome to Assembly Calendar. I'm Mike Friesen. With us for our program today, Assemblyman Ray Walter. Ray Walter represents the 146th Assembly District. That includes counties both Erie and Niagara. And we want to thank you folks all across Western New York for tuning in for our program today. Ray Walter, nice to see you.
Great to see you.
We've got lots to talk about here that's going on at the state capitol. That's our charge, to let you folks know about the conversations and action that's taking place here at the state capitol in Albany that will impact on you and your pocketbooks and your wallets and all that. So stay tuned. We're going to let you know what's going on. Our last few shows, Assemblyman, we've talked about some of the corruption here at the state capitol and the issues that have come about as a result of that. We may pick that theme up again a little bit later on in this show. But let's talk about, I suppose, what is probably much more important for Western New York. And that's economic development, bringing in the jobs, bringing back the jobs to Western New York. That has been, I think, job number one for almost any elected official in Western New York. Not with great success. I mean, this has just been a bad economy the past few years here for the entirety of the state of New York. The governor's got a new proposal out. I'm talking about the tax-free zones.
Right.
Let's talk a little bit about that proposal and some of the reaction that it's getting across the state.
Sure. It's an interesting proposal from the governor to establish tax-free zones on SUNY campuses and near SUNY campuses, as well as private colleges to a more limited extent throughout Upstate. It would not just mean tax-free as far as property tax and things like that we normally see with IDAs and Excelsior zones and things like that. But it would mean that there would be no taxes paid by any employees of these individual companies either, no income tax. So that is a bold proposal.
For a limited window, a 10
for
year,
10 years.
10 year
yes,
window. Yeah.
10 years as they try to bring in high-tech startup companies and try to develop those companies into ongoing larger operations into the future.
Well, it's quite an incentive. You could see where that certainly would attract people. I mean, if you could know that you could go to a place and not have to pay taxes for 10 years, that would get your attention, right?
You would think so, and it definitely is a bold, interesting proposal. Yeah. The issues, though, don't change as far as the underlying economic reality of doing business in New York. And it doesn't change for the hundreds and thousands of businesses throughout Western New York that are already in existence, already have employees, already have products. We're not changing the business environment for them at all. And that is really a concern, I think, that needs to be addressed. More so than these pie-in-the-sky proposals that have no details that go along with them so far.
Yeah, you can see where a lot, while it would be attractive to those people who are thinking, well, I got a business, I need to put it somewhere, that sounds like a good deal. For those people that are already in these areas and maybe would be neighbors to this sort of thing who are already here in New York doing business, that probably doesn't sound like such a good deal.
Sure. I mean, look at the businesses that exist already, certainly in my district, and I've heard from some small businessmen already. So, well, what's going to happen when my competitor comes into town and establishes a place on one of these tax-free zones, and now they can undercut my price because they're not paying any taxes. They're stealing my employees because I don't have any. I can't offer them, no income tax payment. So it really puts existing businesses into a difficult position vis-a-vis these ones that will be established under the tax-free zone. But not only that, what happens after that 10 years? Because then these businesses that have started are now stuck with the same terrible underlying economic situation that we see in upstate New York, throughout upstate New York, and none of the fundamentals of our economy have changed.
So
our over-regulation, our over-taxation.
That's what I was going to say. So what do you think might be the better way to go? I mean, would you say just less taxing in general, less red tape? I mean, what kind of things would you put out there?
Well, sure. We should take a look at the tax code as a whole in New York State, and where can we be more competitive? Certainly, we have a vast amount of expenses in the state budget, and those need to be addressed, and we need to bring our spending down. But even more so, let's take a look at the way we're taxing. A couple of years ago, when the governor proposed his tax reform package, where he maintained higher rates for those making over $2 million a year and slightly cut middle-class tax rates. One of the things that went along with that was a commission to review the entire tax code. Well, we haven't heard a word from that commission yet. I'm not even sure if it has members, if it's doing any work yet. There has been no reports from it. And that's what we really need to take a look at. Maybe we eliminate corporate taxation. Maybe we eliminate tax on manufacturers, and then adjust that somewhere else if we need the revenue. But we need to take a much stronger approach for our existing businesses, not just in attracting new ones.
I would think besides the income tax, I mean, businesses deal with a lot of other taxes and fees and things that they have to deal with the state of New York about. Now, New York's a big state geographically, which means we've got a lot of neighbors. So the businesses, I know, are always looking at their neighbors. I mean, that's human nature, right?
Sure, yeah.
Plus, it's good business to know what's going on around you. So you've got Pennsylvania and Ohio and Massachusetts, Vermont, and New Jersey, Canada. You've got all these other areas around you that treat their businesses differently. Right. And I know a lot of New York businesses seem to think they've got the worst of the lot.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the most difficult places in the country to do business. All of the surveys say that. There was just a survey that came out of CEOs, CFOs across the country, and they ranked New York either last or second to last or third to last. It's usually one of those three as a friendly place to do business. And even more so than the taxation, a lot of that has to do with the regulation. We're over-regulated. Our agencies are hyper-aggressive when enforcing the existing regulations against our businesses. They look at all them as only a revenue source, not as an integral part of the community, or providing jobs and expanding the tax base and improving the quality of life around our communities. Unfortunately, the state looks at them as purely revenue.
Yeah, that's not, and who wants to be looked at,
Right.
In that way?
Exactly.
You want to be a positive, contributing member of the community,
Right.
Not just you're coming at me for my money kind of a thing.
Exactly.
Let me ask you about another subject that we've talked about here on this program in recent weeks, and that's the SAFE Act. You, of course, had a high-profile instance where a member of your community was kind of singled out and became had the center of attention on him for quite a while. You had followed up and sent a letter to the State Inspector General saying, how are we going to do this? How are we going to enforce this? Who's initiating these sorts of things? How's that been received?
Sure, we'd asked the Inspector General to look in the way that the SAFE Act was being implemented, specifically regarding the mental hygiene aspects of it, because my constituent had his guns taken away, his property removed. He had to turn them in to the police, and then it turns out he was wrongly singled out. And so there's flaws in the way that this is being implemented. We asked the Inspector General to take a look at the way the State Police Administration and DCJS has implemented it. That was the beginning of May. I haven't heard a word from the Inspector General. I sent a follow-up letter late last week on Friday, so waiting to hear back from the Inspector General. In the meantime, we're going forward with our own investigation, and we're having a hearing to review this in Amherst with some of the members of the Oversight and Investigation Committee.
You see, you'd think that if you've got legislation that has made its way into law, I mean, it is now the law of the state of New York, that you'd know. That would be an easy answer. How are we going to do this?
Well, sure. Well, you would think that's one of the questions you would ask before you actually pass the law. Unfortunately, the way that this law was shoved down everyone's throats and rushed into existence, none of those questions were able to be asked, and none of those flaws were able to be worked out. One of the signature pieces that the governor touted was having only a 7-bullet magazine for guns instead of 10 bullets. Well, he had to walk that back because those type of magazines just don't exist. So now the law of the land is you can have a 10-bullet magazine, but you can only put 7 bullets in it. What's more ridiculous than that?
Not much. Not much, unless you want to go back to the taxing
sure.
codes that we talked about.
Back to tax and regulation, and then it's much more ridiculous.
A little bit earlier on in the program. So this is going to be interesting. You're holding hearings then across the state still, trying to get input from people on legislation that's already passed. But I guess you feel like there's still hope that some of it could be amended, maybe some of it retracted altogether?
Well, what we'd really like to see is the entire thing repealed and then start over. There are some good pieces to the SAFE Act, but we need to take a step back, relook at everything, and move forward from there, and implement legislation to protect citizens that is thoughtful, that's part of a good thought-out process, and that will really achieve the goals of protecting our children and our families and all of the people of our community from gun violence.
All right, so we've talked about the SAFE Act. We've talked about the governor's proposal on tax-free zones. This governor's been busy putting ideas out on the table for
if he
the
only would
legislature.
put details out on the table, that would be great. He just throws out these big ideas and says, we need your comments on this, and then there's no details to follow it up.
He's the big picture guy.
Yeah, I guess,
on.
right.
So his latest idea that he's putting out there has to do with women's equality. This is,
Sure.
But again, I don't really know what all the details are, what he's looking to accomplish here. Do you?
Well, this is something that he put out in his State of the State address back in January, and has been talking a lot about. Of course, there has actually been no bill that's ever been presented to us. There's no information on what the bill's going to be, what's contained. Now, with 3 weeks left in the session, we hear that the actual language of a bill is going to be presented today. So we'll see that. We'll see what that entails. But it's ironic that this should happen, on the heels of the Lopez scandal, where he sexually harassed members of his staff, young girls, and was blatantly covered up by the Speaker of the Assembly and his staff, not following the rules of the Assembly. The original accusations against Mr. Lopez were covered up. That enabled Mr. Lopez to sexually harass other women in his staff. And now we're rolling out a women's agenda to supposedly protect women when the entire Democratic caucus, for the most part, except for 2 people, have remained silent regarding the cover-up that the Speaker has committed regarding protecting women who work in the Assembly. And, the women in the Assembly have, on the Democratic side, on the majority side, have uttered nary a word about the Speaker's involvement in covering up this scandal.
The Speaker has really prided himself for setting up awareness amongst his employees in the legislature for what to do in cases of sexual harassment, and I think that's key here, because he's still talking about that as explaining why he's not such a bad guy in regards to this particular thing. But the thing is, he totally went against everything that he's put in place for his employees. He really seemed to want to just make this go away by that confidentiality agreement that he reached with the first 2 women that came forward to accuse Assemblyman Vito Lopez of what he did.
And let's be clear on who that confidentiality agreement was meant to protect. It was not requested by the victims here. It was requested by the Speaker in order to protect the Speaker and in order to protect the members of the Assembly. It was not to protect the women. That confidentiality agreement was clearly there to keep this quiet and not to protect the victims in this situation.
So this women's equality bill that's going to be coming out soon, you haven't seen it yet?
Haven't seen any details of the bill. Don't know what's going to be in the bill. We'll see what it's going to be, but we've got 3 weeks coming up in the session. Hopefully this is something we'll be able to take some time with, take a look at. But the hypocrisy of it is really galling, considering the situation that we're facing in the Assembly when the Speaker's covering up sexual harassment.
If you folks watching want to know how to reach out to your representative, it's an easy thing for you to do. There's how you can do it. You can get a hold of Assemblyman Walter at his office in Williamsville at 634-1895, or send an email at the address you see right there on the bottom of the screen. That's walter.r@assembly.state.ny.us. And Ray Walter, thanks for stopping by. As you noted, just a few more weeks to this session. Maybe we'll have one more of these tapings as we get really close to the end, and we can talk more about what's getting done here at the State Capitol.
Sounds good.
Thanks for joining us. Thank you folks, too. Hope to see you for that next edition of Assembly Calendar.